Okay, welcome everybody. It is sort of new and a continuation. Rabbi Grossman, of course, has been teaching the last number of weeks. In a sense, when I approached him, this was about a Kohelet. So the last 4 weeks were really an introduction, as he said. We were discussing the wisdom books, and now we're going to, for the next 4 weeks, going to discuss Kohelet much more in depth. It's a pleasure to welcome back Rabbi Grossman to start this new series. He, of course, is the head of school at Akiva Academy in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So it's a pleasure to always to have an extra pleasure to extra Canadians. And of course, he grew up in Toronto, actually. So he just, most people, as anybody who knows what goes on in Canada, most people went from Montreal to Canada. They went west on the 401. But Rabbi Grossman went east on the 401, 500 kilometers, and the Montreal community is the beneficiary. So, Vakasha, Rabbi Grossman, a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Rabbi Kelman. It's always a pleasure to speak for Torah in Motion. And as Rabbi Kelman said, this is in many ways a continuation of the series that I just finished for someone said I moved for the bagels. Uh, uh, of the series I just did for Torah in Motion on the wisdom literature, Sifrut Chochmah. I encourage those of you who are joining us new for this series. That series is posted on Torah in Motion, and you can go and look. I'm going to try not to be repetitive at all, for the benefit of those who were at that series as well. But you will benefit from the knowledge that you learned, understanding Kohelet, Ecclesiastes within the framework of what's called the wisdom literature. What I did not get to say at the end of the last series, but it's a nice way to start this series, is one of the legacies of the wisdom literature is modern orthodoxy itself. Uh, the idea of uh, wisdom is the concept that God has given us not only revelation, but has given us the human mind as a source of divine wisdom, that the human mind is a second way to get at the divine mind. One way is through direct revelation, through prophecy, and through the record of prophecy, which is Torah. And the prophetic books, but the other way is by using our own minds, and that is no less religious an undertaking as revelation. And that's the beauty of wisdom. It is a completely religious endeavor. And at the same time, it is something that allows a type of human agency, which is really realized in our day and age in modern orthodoxy, and is really what attracted me to Torah in Motion to begin with. And there aren't that many institutions in modern orthodoxy, and I really congratulate you, Rabbi Kelman, on forming a hub for this type of exploration. Kohelet is and has always been my favorite book in all of Tanakh. And it is because it is the book in Tanakh that is closest to Western philosophy, as I explained in the last series. And again, you can go back and take a look why. It is not philosophy. It is very different from philosophy, but it is the closest that we come to philosophy within the biblical canon. Philosophy, the exploration of what life is all about and what course of life is best. That is the famous idea of Socrates that humans explore what course of life is best, trying to figure out our place here in the world. And Kohelet does the same thing. I want to begin just by talking about Kohelet itself, and I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to expand, so hopefully everyone can see it nice and big. There we go. Let's begin by the title of the book, which is in English, Ecclesiastes, and in Hebrew, Hebrew Kohelet. We discussed in the previous series that Kohelet is one of the three books that Chazal attribute to King Solomon, to Shlomo HaMelech, along with Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, and Mishle. Again, I'm not going to go over that since we discussed that in the last series. The third book is Kohelet. However, the book of Kohelet although it makes clear in various places that it is to be understood as the product of Shlomo HaMelech, that Shlomo is the author. That's clearly the intent of the book. Is that in modern scholarship there have been questions about that, but clearly the book intends us to understand it as having been read by Shlomo HaMelech. And from all of my research in terms of the Jewish halachic and literary tradition, there's been no question of Shlomo's authorship, as opposed to some other books where there are different opinions as who wrote them. I told you Eov. There's a whole controversy in the Gemara in terms of who wrote Eov. When it comes to Kohelet, there is consensus that it was written by King Solomon, by Shlomo HaMelech. But he doesn't call himself Shlomo HaMelech. Uh, he calls himself Kohelet here in the book. The book begins by saying it is the words of Kohelet, which is not somebody that we're familiar with. We don't know anyone by the name of Kohelet. And if it is Shlomo HaMelech, why is he calling himself Kohelet? And Rashi comes to the rescue, basing this both on grammar and on the Midrash. I didn't quote the Midrash because Rashi quotes it almost verbatim. Uh, Two explanations by Rashi why the book is called Kohelet and why Shlomo calls himself Kohelet. Al Shem Shekihel Chochmot Harbe. He was called Kohelet. In other words, Shlomo calls himself Kohelet in this book because he gathered much wisdom. The root in Hebrew, Kof He Lamed Kahal, which we know to mean a community. As a Kodesh is how we refer to synagogues. We know we talk about the Kahal, but it really means, in its essence, to gather. A community is a gathering of people. And the first explanation Rashi gives is that Kohelet is an anthology. It's called Kohelet because Shlomo Melech gathered wisdom from different places and put it in this book, which is important. Wisdom, again, as I explained in the previous series, is something that can be gathered from many, many places, not only Jewish places. Wisdom is something that is passed down from generation to generation. You meet wise people, you collect their ideas, you collect their sayings. And it is clear here, and Rashi has no problem with it. Shlomo didn't come up with all of this stuff on his own. He gathered wisdom from different places, and as we will see, from his own life experience. And he put it all together in this book. So it's important to understand right away. Rashi says Kohelet is an anthology of wisdom. Shlomo gathered it from a bunch of different places. The other thing that I think it refers to is the fact that if you read through Kohelet, it will seem very disjointed. Uh, uh, when you read through Kohelet on your own, you can't escape the thought that he could have used a good editor. It seems to be all over the place, and one of my goals in this particular series is to organize Kohelet's thought for you. That's my job here, my gift to you in this series. It's a wonderful book to read, but when you read it, it will seem very repetitive and often contradictory. In fact, Chazal say that there was a controversy whether Kohelet should have even been included in rabbinic literature in the canon, in the 24 books of the Tanakh, because it is so disjointed and so contradictory. I will try to sort that out for you and give the book a coherence. But one of the reasons Rashi highlights for us here that it seems so disjointed and disconnected is because it is anthologized, it is gathered from a bunch of different places. Rashi gives a second explanation. Rashi often gives two explanations for different phenomena. On a separate course on Rashi, we can talk about why that's the case. However, here he gives a second possibility why it's Kohelet. Yesh omrim shehaya omer kol devarav behakhel. Uh, some say that the reason he's called Kohelet is that he would say his words in a kehillah, in a public gathering in a community. That's the second explanation. Explanation number one is kahal. Kohelet means someone who gathers together information. Number two is he's called Kohelet because he speaks to people while they are gathered together. And for this reason, the book is called Ecclesiastes in the Septuagint. In the Greek translation, Ecclesiastes means one who is part of a congregation. There's certain churches that are called ecclesiastical churches. They're churches that operate on a congregational model. In the Septuagint and following that in English translations of the Bible, Kohelet is called Ecclesiastes, which is a Greek word for one of the community, somebody who is speaking within a community. Perhaps a little better is the King James translation of Kohelet. King James calls Kohelet the preacher. Not someone who is part of a congregation, but actually somebody who is leading a congregation, somebody who is preaching. And this actually fits with what we know about Shlomo HaMelech, that people used to come and listen to him hold forth with wisdom. And we can think of Kohelet almost as a Socrates type figure, someone who's standing in the public square and who is preaching his wisdom. So those are two different ways of understanding Kohelet and understanding why it is called Kohelet and not Shlomo. Okay, that is Kohelet. I want to move on to why we're doing Kohelet right now, which is that Kohelet is read on Sukkot. There is a tradition, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, of reading Kohelet on the holiday of Sukkot. And I want to share with you, by way of introduction, my experience, a little story that happened to me when I was about 20 years old. As I mentioned at the very, very beginning when I was talking to Rabbi Kelman, Kohelet is my favorite book in the Tanakh. I always loved it as a teenager. And I found myself when I was a yeshiva student, we were off for Sukkot, so we got to go to whatever synagogue we wanted. And I was in a small Hasidic shtibel in Yerushalayim when I was about 20 years old, and it was Sukkot. And that synagogue had the tradition that everybody would read Kohelet on his or her own. Everyone had their own Kohelet and would read it on his or her own. The general Ashkenazi tradition is to read it publicly and to read it with Tamei Mikra, but it's not the only tradition. Sephardim we don't read it at all. Um, or they read it quietly to themselves. This particular Hasidic community had the tradition that everybody would have a copy of their own. And here I was in this room, and they broke tefillah after mincha, and they give everyone the chance to read Kohelet on their own. So there I was, and I was reading through Kohelet, and as I said, my favorite book. And there was this person sitting next to me in full Hasidic garb, and he's just like flipping through the pages. And every couple moments he yells out Hevel, 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 which we'll see is the main word of Kohelet. Hevel, Hevel, Zehevel, Hevel, 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 Hevel. And he's just like flipping through. And finally he gets to the end of the book and he goes, Shmol mitzvot. And he closes his book. And then he starts like humming this little nigun. And I'm this idealistic 20-year-old yeshiva student, and I was just heartbroken. I was just absolutely devastated that this great work of philosophy was just like flipped through, and all this guy could say was Hevel, 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 and then at the end, Shmor mitzvot, keep the mitzvot, and then go into a Hasidic nigun. And every time I read Kohelet, I'm reminded of that story. And as I've gotten older, I'm in my 50s now, and I look back at my younger self. First of all, I think it was a little judgmental of me. I don't know what was going through this guy's mind, and perhaps I shouldn't have been so judgmental. And anyway, we read through lots of stuff in tefillah, in synagogue, and we don't pay attention to its great contents. But more importantly, as I got older, I realized, in fact, he's kind of right. In fact, there was a pretty good summary of the entire book, which is Hevel, Hevel, Hevel. Everything in life is Hevel. Everything is meaningless. Shmor mitzvot, and in the end, we should keep the mitzvot. And I want to show you in this series that while it's a bit facile, and it'll take a while to get there, it's not a bad summary. And it says, Elul et chataya ani maskir hayom, overly judgmental of this gentleman. But it's a pretty good summary of what the book is about. Life is basically meaningless, and at the same time, what we should be doing in life is keeping Torah and mitzvah. So, with that story in mind, let's move on to where we get this idea of reading Kohelet on Sukkot from, and why on earth we are reading it on Sukkot. The uh, first reference we have to the reading of Megillot on various Jewish holidays comes from Masechet Sofrim. There's a bit of a scholarly controversy as to how old Masechet Sofrim is. The early people put it at about the 8th century, around the time of the Gaonim. Some people say it's later, 10th century, early medieval. So about 1,000 years about 1,000 years old, either 8th to 10th century, depending on your scholarly religious proclivities. And we read in Masechet Sofrim, ברות ושיר השירים באיכה ומגילת אסתר צריך לומר על מקרא מגילה, ואף על פי שכתובה בכתובים. In the case of Ruth, Song of Songs, Lamentations, and Esther, it is necessary to say the bracha al mikra megillah, even though it is part of the Hagiographa, even though it's part of Tuvim. The halacha here will not occupy us. This is a halacha question about making the bracha al mikra megillah when we read the various megillot, not our topic today. What is of interest to us is here in Masechet Sofrim, we have the first record of reading megillot and making brachot as we read Megillot, and later in Masechet Sofrim, we will see that the Megillot are read on various holidays. B'shir Hashim karim oto belelei yamim tovim shel Pesach. Song of Songs is read on the last nights of Passover. Ruth b'motzei yom tov rishon shel Atzeret. Ruth is read on the termination of the first day. A record in Masechet Sofrim that Ruth is read on Shavuot. Song of Songs is read on Pesach. Megillat Esther, of course, we have a whole Masechet on that. We don't need to say. Esther, of course, is read on Purim, and Lamentations, also we have many references. Obviously, is read on Tisha B'Av. And you will notice, if you look at this list, we have a missing piece. There is no mention of Kohelet. No mention in Masechet Sofrim of the tradition of reading Kohelet on Sukkot. So by the 8th or as late as the 10th century, there was no tradition of reading Kohelet on Sukkot. This is a late tradition, even though these other books at a much earlier time were associated with various holidays. So how did this happen that Kohelet was read on Sukkot? So the answer is we don't know. What we do know is a few hundred years later, at least by the 11th century, medieval halachic works start to quote from Masechet Sofrim, um, including Sidur Rashi. 100 to 200 years after Masechet Sofrim, medieval halachic works start to quote from Masechet Sofrim and start to add in Kohelet on Sukkot. So by the Middle Ages, this list has expanded, and Kohelet has occupied the Sukkot slot, and we don't know why. There are at least half a dozen major reasons and a dozen minor reasons why we might read Kohelet on Sukkot. Whenever there are too many reasons for a phenomenon, the assumption is that probably none of them is dispositive. However, it is a tradition that goes back to the Middle Ages. The easiest explanation as to why Kohelet is read on Sukkot was simply to fill in the fifth. That we have five Megillot, we've got five holidays. You see here that in Masechet Sofrim, four of the five are covered, and Kohelet was left as an orphan and needed to be associated with a holiday, and therefore Kohelet became associated with Sukkot because we needed it to have a home, and its home was on Sukkot. That is probably the easiest and the most simple explanations. And it also makes sense because there is something very dissonant between Kohelet and Sukkot. Sukkot is famously called Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy. The Torah already talks about Sukkot as a time of joy, a time of festivity. It's a time of the harvest, where there's lots of food, and the winter hasn't yet set in. It's a very joyous time. Rabbi Kalman talks about my Canadian heritage, but I also lived most of my life in the United States. Sukkot is Thanksgiving time. It's a time of happiness and Thanksgiving. And Kohelet is a very, very sobering book. I wouldn't call it depressing. It's not Eicha, but it is a very, very sobering look at life, and is very dissonant with the happiness of Sukkot. Uh, Rabbi Azariah Figo, who was the author of a work in the 17th century, Rabbi Azariah Figo had an interesting take on this, which has become very popular. And Rabbi Figo says that it is specifically because Kohelet has a sobering effect on people, because it is a very serious, sobering book. That's why we read it on Sukkot, in order to tamper down our joy a little bit. That Sukkot can get a little bit out of hand. Anyone who's attended synagogue on Simchat Torah for sure knows that Sukkot can often get out of hand. And Rabbi Figo in the 17th century suggested that Kohelet is there to tamper down the festivities of Sukkot, and to make sure that our joy is tamed a little bit, and that things don't get too out of hand on Sukkot. There's an old tradition that things tended to get out of hand on Sukkot, and we need to tame it. That's where the mechitza comes from. The Gemara talks about the mechitza as a way of separating men and women, because Sukkot got out of hand. People were overly partying and joyous. And Rabbi Figo says that's the purpose of Kohelet as well. It's probably the most famous explanation, but it's only from the 17th century. And it comes from Rabbi Figo. There is, I think, another possible answer, which is, if not true, certainly very poetic, and that is that Sukkot is the holiday on which King Solomon dedicated the temple. And King Solomon, author of Kohelet, gathers people together on Sukkot in order to dedicate the Beit Hamikdash. And we read here in the book of Kings, Vaikahalu el Hamelech Shlomo kol ish Yisrael. The entire body of Israel gathered, that word kahal again, before King Solomon at the feast of Booth and Sukkot in the month of Etanim, the seventh month. And Solomon dedicates the temple. Solomon declared, God has chosen to abide in a thick cloud. I have now built for you a stately house, a place where your name may dwell forever. Bano vaniti bait. I have built a house for God. So I think it's actually a possibility that Kohelet is read on Sukkot because this is King Solomon's big holiday, and it is the holiday of Kohelet, the holiday of gathering people together. Okay, that is the connection between Sukkot and Kohelet. As I said in my story, the late vort, there is an idea of a light vort, of a certain word that repeats itself over and over again in uh, in in the Bible. When you read Tanakh, one of the ways of figuring out the theme of a paragraph, of a book, of a parasha, of a story is to look for something called a leitvort, a word that repeats itself over and over and over again, sort of like a leitmotif. A leitvort is a word that appears over and over and over again in the Bible. Other pieces of literature use Leitworten as well. And you can often tell the theme of a biblical passage or a biblical book by looking at a word that repeats over and over and over again. As I said in my story, that word for Kohelet is Hevel, the word Hevel. And here I'm just going to go back briefly and then expand on what I said in the last series. At the very beginning of Kohelet, he lays out this theme. He says, "Havel havalim amar Kohelet, havel havalim hakol havel." Hevel havalim said Kohelet, hevel havalim all is havel. I specifically left this untranslated. Many of you are familiar with the common English translations. Hevel havalim, vanity of vanities, utter futility. That's the new JPS translation. Meaningless, meaningless, which is the new international version. And there are various other translations of the word hevel, ephemeral, absurd, senseless, fleeting, illusory, frustration, and incomprehensible. All of those are good. All of those words reflect aspects of hevel. Uh, it's always most useful, I believe, to leave it untranslated. Hevel, as I wrote here, literally means breath or vapor. It's obviously meant to be taken metaphorically, but its literal sense is what you see when you breathe out, especially on a cold day, which is something that is there and then gone. And you will see all of these words reflect aspects of that, namely a vanity not in the meaning of a vain person, of somebody who cares too much about their own beauty, but rather of beauty itself as something that is fleeting, something that disappears, something that is there and gone, something that is meaningless, as I said, something that appears one time and is gone the next. And as we read through the book, you will see that all of these aspects of Hevel will come up, and Kohelet will use Hevel to describe the human condition. That's why it's such an important word in the book. The human condition. What is the human condition? The human condition is mortality. That is what it means to be human, not only to be mortal, but to be conscious of our mortality. Obviously, we know all living beings are mortal. Every plant, every animal dies. but only humans, as far as we know, are conscious of our mortality. A fly that is born that is going to die in a day or so does not know that it's going to die in a day or so. It does not have any awareness of its own mortality. And when you come and you swat it, it is gone in a second, and it's never had a second thought about that. Only humans are both mortal and conscious of our mortality. And that is what occupies Kohelet. We're going to talk in the lecture too about the idea of the afterlife and what that means for Kohelet. I've been asked about this before in the last series. I will dedicate some time to it, but it is important as we approach the book to understand that when it comes to human existence, Kohelet takes it on face value that life is as we see it, and our experience in this world is one where we are here one moment and gone the next. And therefore, what really is the purpose of our whole life? Since no matter what we do, it's gone. It's gone in a flash. That is what is going to occupy. So let us dig right in to Kohelet. He says, Havel Havalim, Amar Kohelet, Havel Havalim, Hakol Havel. Vanity of vanity, says Kohelet. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. So he states right in the beginning that all of life is Hevel, all of life is vanity, is ephemeral. And Kohelet Rabbah, the Midrash, has a fascinating read on this opening verse, which again sets out the theme of the book. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Simon Amar, Shiva Havalim, Shama Kohelet, Keneged Shiva Yemei Vereshit. Rabbi Yehuda ben Simon said, the 7 vanities that Kohelet mentioned correspond to the 7 days of creation. Okay, so first let's just take a look at how rabbinic interpretation of verses go. Where do you get 7 here? The way that the Rabbi Yehuda counts 7 is we have Havel, that's 1. Havalim, that's plural, so that's 2. Amar Kohelet. Havel, right? That's 4, right? Havalim, that's 6, right? Havalim, plural 2. Hakol Havel, that gets us to 7. So that's a midrashic way of reading this verse and finding 7 havels in this verse. Again, midrashic readings of Tanakh will not occupy us too much here, except to understand that Rabbi Simon looks at this verse and notices 7 in the verse of Havalim, and he makes a fascinating connection. He says the 7 Havalim that Kohelet is talking about here correspond to the 7 days of creation. And what I want to suggest in this opening lecture is that the opening of Kohelet should be read against the story of creation. And to understand the project of Kohelet, to understand what Shlomo Melech is doing in this book, we need to read it against the story of the 7 days of creation. This is a general principle. Any of you who have studied Tanakh with me before know it's my general principle of how I study Tanakh. I think it's an incredibly important way to study Tanakh, and that is intertextually. Whenever we look at a passage in Tanakh, we should always think what this passage reminds us of. I did this again in the last series, talking about the connections between the wisdom literature and the story of Joseph. The Tanakh is an intertextual document. Stories in the Tanakh are meant to make you think of other stories in Tanakh. And the trick is figuring out which, but Rabbi Simon does this for us and says, when you read the beginning of Kohelet, think about the 7 days of creation. So let's turn there now and see what Rabbi Simon was talking about. We're not going to go through all the details. I imagine everyone here is basically familiar with the story, but let me point out a few. So first of all, right, when God creates the world, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, v'haaretz hayita tohu vavohu. The earth was unformed and void. The world was chaos, and the word was darkness, right? The ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. A wind from God was sweeping over the water. The opening scene of creation. God has just created a chaotic, unformed world, and a wind from God, a ruach Elohim, is hovering over the water, and God says, "V'yomer Elohim yehi or," or God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. So we go from chaos to creation. We have God in the form of wind. We go from darkness into light. All of this from the words of God, and then over and over again in the creation story, if there is a light word, again a word that repeats itself over and over again, that hints towards the theme of this passage in Tanakh, and as I said, that's the best way of figuring out what the passage is. The word is Tov. If you look at the story of creation, the light for it is Tov, right? You see this. Vayar Elohim et haor ki Tov. God saw that the light was good. I've highlighted here for you, right? And God saw that this was good. Vayar Elohim ki Tov. And God saw that this was good. And God said that this was good over and over again. And God said this was good. And God said that this was good. God creates the world. He creates the sun. He creates the seas. He creates the sky, and everything is good until at the very end, right? He says v'hinei tov me'od, that God sees the whole world and it is very good. That is the leitmotif. And at the end of the 7 days of creation, God creates the Garden of Eden. Vayikach Hashem Elokim et Adam vayanichehu v'gan Eden la'ovda. And then God settled and placed man in the Garden of Eden to work it. God puts man in the Garden of Eden into the place of paradise. That is how the story of creation begins. And Rabbi Simon tells us, okay, that there is a connection between Kohelet and this story. The story which ends with man working for God, right? In paradise, life is good. And that is what Kohelet undone in his first chapter. And that's what Rabbi Simon, I believe, is telling us. If you look at the beginning of Kohelet, Kohelet does everything he can to undo this first story of creation. So instead of the light vort being good, instead of the word that keeps repeating itself, good, 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 the word that repeats itself is Havel, 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 Hevel, Hevel, Hevel. Instead of good, 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 it is futility, futility, futility. See how it works, right? We have two Leitworter, right? We have two theme words, okay? But they're completely contradictory to each other, okay? The story of creation starts with, right, God saying two words, Yehi or, let there be light, and Kohelet begins by saying two words, right? Hakol Havel, Havel Havalim. Okay, so again, the language is the same, right? Amar Kohelet, right? Havel Havalim, Amar Kohelet, right? God says, "Let there be light." Kohelet says, Havalim. So these are the parallels. God's declaration is, "Let there be light." Okay, and light in Tanakh always has the connotation of wisdom, of illumination, just like it does in English, right? Kiner Elohim v'Torat or, right? The Torah is light. Okay, uh, this is the opposite, right? We are in a dark, futile world. The story of creation, I told you, ends with man being placed in the Garden of Eden to work, right? God appoints man to work. Okay, man is happy to work. He's working directly for God, right for the boss, right? He's working in paradise, right? And of course, there's nothing more meaningful than doing God's work. God tells humans exactly what to do, right? It's pure meaning in work. And what's the first thing that Kohelet says? Ma yitron la'adam b'chol amalo she'amal tachat hashamash. A complete inversion, okay, of what is said in the beginning. What value is there for man in all he works beneath the sun? Adam, Adam Arishon never asked such a question. What value is there? What value is there? I'm working for God. I'm doing what God asked me to do. There could be no greater value than that. And Kohelet completely deconstructs this, turns it on his head, and says, "Really, what's the value of all of this work that I'm doing?" In the creation story, God creates the sun. That is an unmitigated good, right? The idea we've gone from darkness to light, and Kohelet, it's like almost like an Eeyore here, taking the most beautiful thing, right? The creation of light. How can you say anything bad about the sun, right? And what does he say, right? The sun rises, the sun sets. V'zarach hashamesh, uva hashamesh el mekomo, right? The sun rises, the sun sets, right? Life is just an endless cycle over and over and over again. We really don't get anywhere. The sun is not anything particularly positive. Look at the wind. Same thing. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds, the wind returns. Remember, in the creation story, what was wind? Wind was a sign of the divine, Ruach Elohim. We are introduced to wind as a sign of God. Think about it. You can look at the wind, and what do you think about? There's something that is not there. There's something that's intangible, and yet you feel its presence on you, right? That can be interpreted as a sign of the divine, and that's what we are told in the beginning of Bereshit, right? That we have this wind of God, and Kohelet completely turns it on his head. There's no intimation here that this wind is anything other than air that's just blowing around, okay? And the wind is a sign of the monotony of life. So too, the waters. In the Genesis story, the waters are teeming with life, with creativity, with generation. And what does Kohelet say? All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. Right? The sea is not a place of fecundity. It's not a place of generation. It's just another sign of the never-ending tedium of life. And he says that in verse 6. Kol dvarim yigeim. All such things are wearisome. The Genesis story is about creativity and production, and Kohelet says it's just boring. It's just tedious. It keeps happening over and over again. It is wearisome. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened, only that which which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. There can be no greater inversion of creation than saying, right, that there is nothing new. Bereshit is all about the new, that God is creating, that there's new things every single day of creation. We see something new, 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 and that is the positivity of the story of creation. And Kohelet turns that on its face and says, there is there is nothing new. There is no creativity, only repetition. And he summarizes it here, and he says in verse 13. So I set my mind to study and probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun. So I tried to figure this out. An unhappy business, that which God gave man to be concerned with. I observed all the things that happen beneath the sun, and I found that all is uh, futile and pursuit of wind. So what I want to suggest here is why Kohelet is doing this. And my answer is that the story of creation is God looking down. I've said before that the idea of wisdom literature is understanding that there is a divine realm and there is a human realm. The story of creation is God looking down at the world from the divine realm. And when God looks down, everything looks light and positive and generative and creative. That is how the world looks from the divine perspective. Heavens looking down to earth. Kohelet is humans looking around. That's the difference between the two books, and that's the inversion. Uh, Genesis is God looking down, and Kohelet is man, humanity, looking out at the world. And when humanity looks out at the world, we don't see the creativity, we don't see the generations, we do not see the positivity. What we see is Havel. What we see is an ephemeral world where life seems meaningless. And I want to be careful. I was very precise. I didn't say that Genesis is God looking down and Kohelet is man or humanity looking up, because Kohelet believes when you look up, you don't see anything. Part of Kohelet's theme, which we're going to see repeated over the book, is that we do not have access to the divine realm. It's not worth looking up because we're not going to find anything. Humans do not have access to the divine realm, to the divine mind. We do not know what's uh, going on upstairs. We don't know what's going on with God. All we can do is look around us and try to figure out things the best that we can. And that's his project. Kohelet says, right, that is what he's dedicating his book to, right? That he has dedicated, that is verse 13 I'm looking for here. Yes, I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun. That is the best that we can do as humans, to look around us and to figure things out on our own. And that's going to be his project for the book. He's not going to try to figure out what's going on upstairs. That's not going to lead anywhere. But humans can look around them and figure things out. Now, I want to pause for a second to admit that I've been slightly dishonest with you, in that when I said we're going to look at the creation story, I only looked at the beginning of the creation story. And I very purposefully left out the story of the Garden of Eden. I put the cutoff point when God puts us in the Garden of Eden and everything is wonderful and everything is beautiful, because life is meaningful, because God is right beside us and telling us exactly what to do, and we know that our work is meaningful because we're doing God's work. But those of us who have read Bereshit know that that's not how the story of creation ends. ויקח השם אלוקים את האדם ויניחהו בגן עדן לעובדיו ולשומרה. God, Hashem settled the human in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. And Hashem commanded the human, saying, of every tree of the garden you're free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you may not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. Ume'etz hadat tov v'ra Lo tochal mimenu kiviyom acholcha mimenu mot tamut. And we know how the story ends. We know that humans eat from the tree. And that is where Kohelet begins. The book of Kohelet is a post-Edenic meditation on life. Kohelet says, I am looking at life post-Eden. What Christians would call after the fall. It's not really a Jewish term. We don't really believe in the fall, but post-Eden, after we are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, life looks pretty much exactly the same today as it did in the time of Kohelet, as it did right after humans were kicked out of the garden. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so number one, it means we're no longer working directly for God. We no longer have direct communication with God. And to return to a theme I've stated before, Kohelet does not work with revelation. Human, man, woman in the Garden of Eden had revelation, right? They had direct contact with God to tell them what life was all about. Every once in a while, later in Jewish history, God reappeared to various people, to Avraham, to the Avot, to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, to the Nevi'im, to resume that communication, that revelation. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. The rule is, after the Garden of Eden, humans do not have revelation on a daily basis, do not have direct communication with God. Instead, what do we have? We have the fruit of the tree of knowledge. We have the ability to judge things. We have knowledge. We have wisdom. And that is post-Eden existence. Post-Eden existence is a life without direct communication with God, without direct knowledge of what is meaningful, but with that, with human knowledge of and the ability to figure out life. More, what was the curse of being thrown out of the Garden of Eden? Uladam Amar, to Adam, God said, because you did as your wife said and ate of the tree about which I commanded, you shall not eat it, right? Because you ate from the tree of knowledge, right? Arura ha'adama bavurecha. Cursed shall be the ground because of you. By hard labor shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Post-Eden existence is a life of hard labor, and that's what Kohelet deals with, right? This is a world where work is hard, and it is a world of mortality, right? He ends, right? Bezayat apecha tochal lechem ad shuvcha el ha'adama ki mimena lukachta ki afar ata vel afar tashuv. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat. Work's going to be hard until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust shall you return. And that sentiment is repeated in Ecclesiastes, in Kohelet, right? Where he says, and we're going to be talking about this in a future lecture, right? For in respect to the fate of man, the fate of beast, they have one and the same fate. As the one dies, the other, and both have the same life breath. Man has no superiority over beast, since both amount to nothing. Umotar hadam mina behema ayin kiakol havel. Right? Everything is havel. Everything amounts to nothing because we return to the ground and because we are mortal. And that is what Kohelet is going to try to figure out. Since humans are mortal, since we are only here for a brief period of time, since our existence is ephemeral, right? What are we supposed to do? What is our life all about? How can we get any meaning here from our existence? Um, and his project is going to be to try to figure that out for us. As I told you, the punchline at the beginning, believe it or not, he figures out that our existence here is going to be fulfilling God's will, doing the mitzvot, but it's going to take him a long time to get there. How do we get to the fact that life on a daily basis seems after Eden so meaningless, so purposeless, and so ephemeral? How do we get to that, to a life of meaning through the performance of the mitzvot? That's going to take us 12 chapters, but hopefully you'll be with me for the journey, and I'll look forward to taking you there over the next few weeks. Thank you so much. I'll take a look in the chat and open up for any quick questions. Oh, someone mentioned about. Thank you so much. Someone mentioned about Hakel on Sukkot. Yes, very very nice. Another beautiful connection. Hakel specifically is about Sefer Dvarim, but for sure there are people who've made this connection as with Kohelet as well, as a time where we can appear in front of the Kahal, right? That's what Hakel is about, and preach and proclaim Tanakh. So yes, a very nice connection. There's a very nice connection as well. Anyone's free if they wish to come off mute and ask any questions.
Can I ask a question about your last series?
Yeah, of course.
I had to get most of it from the archive. So when you mentioned that Chokhmah the wisdom is referred to in the feminine, in the Chokhmah, that there was a verse, you had Chokhmot Tarona, so that was in plural in the
Yeah.
subject and the verb. But at the end of the pasuk, I forget what precedes it, but it was la. So it changes to singular. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, thank you so much for bringing that up, because notice Kohelet is also in the feminine. Isn't that amazing, right? The name that he chooses for himself, right, is Kohelet, which is a feminine version of the word Kahal, right? Because he's personifying himself, right? Even though Shlomo is clearly a man, right? But when he personifies himself as a preacher of wisdom, right, he refers to himself in the feminine. So thank you. I didn't have a chance to point that out at the beginning. Baruch Shekivanti, thank you so much for pointing that out. Yeah. So the answer is grammatical. Okay. Oftentimes when we have a personification in a verb, we put it into the plural. It's just a grammatical phenomenon that in the Hebrew language. So chokhmot can be it's like a plural of majesty. Can be a form that's used. We have that even for for majestic or huge animals. Behemoth means the behemoth, right? It can be used as a singular form of a noun as well. So the ot ending isn't always plural. Sometimes it can just be. I think that's what you're asking. It can also be construed as a singular in biblical Hebrew.
Thank you.
Yes, please just come off mute if you have a question.
Yes. Rabbi?
Yes. Oh, hi, Claudette.
Good. Hi. I want to say thank you for the study. Kohelet is one of my favorite books also. I must have read that book over 100 times, and I have studied it with many rabbis. And every time I study it, I learn something new. You have opened my eyes and now I'm going to go search the Tanakh and read Genesis and try to, go through Kohelet again. I always learn something new from each rabbi that I've studied it with. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. Let me just answer this question from the chat. Why not eat of the tree of knowledge, and what is the proper definition of wisdom? Okay, so why not eat of the tree of knowledge is a very, very deep topic, and that I can't get into now, but I'm happy to take that offline if you wish to email me. But the easiest way of looking at the story of the Garden of Eden is to see it as what we call an ideology, which is a story of the past that explains the condition of the present. So instead of reading the story beginning to end, it's easier to read the story of the Garden of Eden backwards. In other words, how is it that we ended up here? How is it that we ended up that we live in a world without direct communication with God on a daily basis, with only our mind to figure out the world? And if you read the story backwards, which is how etiologies work, then it makes sense. Not again, we can talk about why you shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge, but the importance of the story is that we have eaten from the tree of knowledge, right? And that we have wisdom, and that is our path back to God. As for the proper definition of wisdom, so the most broad definition is that wisdom is the power of the human mind. That's it. It encompasses everything that the human mind can comprehend. And again, you can go back to the last series if you want more detail. It encompasses both factual knowledge and also human reasoning. In a few lectures, I'm going to talk about empirical versus empiricism versus rationalism, different types of human thought. So if you can hold off, we'll talk about different types of human thought. And the other idea of wisdom is the ability to process knowledge as opposed to knowledge proper, which is factual, which allows me the opportunity to say my favorite quip on this, which I shared before, but I love saying it, so I'll say it again. That knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So that's a good way of understanding the difference between the two. Yes, please.
Question.
Yes.
Can I just continue? Just I looked in the dictionary.
Yes.
It wasn't always knowledge oriented. It was to act on that knowledge. In other words, the whole question is Solomon a wise man or not? And if you go by the dictionary, you have to consider he was smarter than anyone else, but is he wiser than anyone else? Is wisdom just being smart, or does wisdom have to work? And do you have to follow through with it? So I'd like to raise that question. I think it's fundamental to Solomon's study.
Oh, I think that's excellent, excellent. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's also a great distinction between what we're talking about here in terms of wisdom and philosophy, right? Philosophy, certainly, as Rambam takes it, right? Pure contemplation does not have to have any type of practical application, right? According to Rambam, and he gets this from the classical philosophers, Plato and the Neoplatonists, right? According to Rambam, if you could be a disembodied mind, if you could just be in the state of pure contemplation, right, that would be like the highest thing that the human mind could do. So thank you so much for pointing that out. That is not wisdom, right? Right. What we are talking about here is absolutely things that can be applied, right, and that can actually tell us how to live our lives and what we should be doing. So thank you. I neglected to make that distinction, but again, thank you for pointing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's great.
I have a question.
Okay, we'll make this the last, but please.
Bechira Chofshit preceded the
Yes.
eating from the Etz Hadat.
Yes.
So what does the Eitz Hadat add that we didn't have before?
So the question was, if we clearly had free choice before, right? Eating from the tree did not give us free choice. No, clearly we had to have a free choice before we chose to eat from the tree. The tree of knowledge, most simply put, gave us the ability to contemplate our own existence, right? That we did not have before. We certainly had the ability to obey or to disobey, but before the eating of the tree of knowledge, right? We did not have the ability to contemplate our own existence and to figure out our own existence. All that came from God previous to eating from the tree, but not free choice. Free choice for sure we had before. Otherwise, how could we have chosen to eat from it? Okay, with that, we will break, and I'll look forward to next week, where we'll be talking about a meeting in Samara. Until then, shalom, shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.